pleasure. It's always a pleasure to have
Yeah.
a sit down and talk with you. Um, for quite some time now, you started this labor inspection, going to workplaces both at in public and private. Tell us, how has this been in terms of the impact on the workers? Has this really been making sense from the feedback you've been getting?
Well, definitely. I think since to ask if it is making sense and for me to respond, that would be an understatement. It has been making vast and rapid change. Um, and I like the aggression in how it is operating by itself, merely by enforcing the act. We have, while receiving over 40 something $1 million up to now, today's date, while that is a figure, it I still am really sad, and there's a direction that why we having these inspections and we're educating workers, because it tells me that if one has to work and then to come to the Department of Labor where we have to call in the employer before it will be paid, that is not something we at this government really embrace. I think that also should be educated and respectful for each other and the laws, and to understand that a worker provides a service and they ought to be paid. It is not a favor you're doing to the person. They work and they should be paid. All right? If they're dismissed, you know the law, you know they have to get their severance, and you should adhere. One should have to come to the Department of Labor to be paid. But nevertheless, that is what we inherited. But from the inspections, we find now that more workers are well educated, because when we go there to conduct inspection, one of our main focus also is to educate employer employee. And on both hands, we were in Regent Street, and the very next day we had a packed boardroom, and we had employers coming in and saying that, listen, we never had a roster, we don't know how to do it. We need your technical support and your advice and guidance, in which we provide here from the ministry. So that in itself is very positive coming from the employer. When it comes to the employee, the feedback we get from them, that we now going to be paid overtime in some cases, and persons now calling for the book. Now they're pushing, they understand about their NIS and different aspect of it. So the workers too, they are benefiting. They now know their times of work, and they also know they're entitled to. So that is filtering in. And persons who have babysitters, domestic workers, they also are coming in and calling my secretariat to say, well, listen, I have a babysitter. The 8 hour falls to my babysitter. If I'm to go over, the overtime falls to the babysitter, and the answer to that is yes. It's a work, right? And it's wide across the board. So it is positive. It is making some changes, and it is not a one-off spin. It is something that I want for the employers to understand, that under the watch of this government, this is a must. This is what has to happen. So they ought to, soak this into the culture. They have to change that. It is not something that we're coming in as a government, and I'm sitting here with responsibility for labor. Oh, and you just go there and have an inspection, this week or next week. So I'm putting them on notice. It's in their best interest to adhere to the law. Because as long as I'm here and as long as government is here, this is the approach. We are going to conduct inspection, and I want that when we go there to conduct inspection, yes, we will find breaches, but at the least, workers' pay, workers' time, exploitation, abuse, the guard services. Women was here and said to me that, for example, they work from 7 to 6 till next morning. They don't have a babysitter. The eldest child in the family was 9. So put the kids to sleep early, and they lock them in the house, and they come to work. And the next morning, nobody come to relieve them until up to 3 o'clock. And when this happens, the children is at home, unsupervised and hungry. She said all they had sometimes is water in the house. They would eat the sugar just as it is. They would suck it out because they can't cook. They're not of the age. She said in one instance she went home and the children were eating the rice raw. I think And that is a reality, and that is why sometimes, I mean, it is new for Guyanese people, but why is Broomes operating like that when it comes to labor? I think Guyanese people, we don't know what really is taking place. There are particular guard service where, you know, the women came and they said that while they're there and they have persons come in and inspect them during the night, those same male want to have sex with them at these guard huts and all of that. That also we're putting an end to it. Um, so the point I'm making here, I'm talking about workers across the board. It is not just at one level or the other. So to deal with the IR situations in terms of leave pay and all of that, um, it is an area that one has to adhere to. Occupational safety and health, which falls here, you mentioned about it, and even within the ministry, this government, our approach is so tight on it. I've just sent out letters to various ministers and PSs at all the ministries asking for compliance to have their occupational safety and health committee functioning in every ministry. And to that end, next year, April, it is the month where we observe Occupational Safety and Health Month. That will be a big month next year. So we'll be running an inter-ministry competition. So you have to have your ministry and your departments, and you'll have to tidy up your places, the environment in which workers work, and all of that. So we at the government, well, we're calling on the private sector also. We in house, we are taking the lead role on this because indeed it is no secret in the ministry and the workplaces. You go down to Cornhill Street and you see where the co-op's office is situated. I think it's not fit for workers to be there. And so we're starting in-house. So we're not only going out there talking occupational safety and health, it's a serious issue when it comes to the mining sector. I think everyone would have heard the speech of the president at Aurora. And he did point out um, a death a month is a death too much. And he was very firm on that. I myself is now seconded to doing some work at the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment. I was there at the board meeting to look into occupation safety and health is one high on the agenda, along with some other responsibilities. But to deal with the situation in the mining sectors and workers' rights and their wages, but the fatalities and all these accidents and all of that, um, enforcement of the regulation and so on, we're going to look for maximum compliance to deal with that situation.
With regard to the inspections that are done in both private and the public sectors, I would imagine there has been some challenges. Um, can you, if you can, highlight some of the major challenges which your Labor Inspectorate Department is facing or has faced in terms of bringing employers into conformity with labor regulations?
Well, I think the first approach, some of the employers would have had challenges, especially if they know when they're in breach. We would have had to take some strong actions. In some cases, I had to get involved to submit the roster because there was none. To submit their documents because they know that they are cheating and stealing from the workers, and the NIS revenues that are deducted from workers is not being paid over. And so some of the employers, you know, they kind of hesitant. Just recently, they had an inspection conducted at Ogle, and we had some challenges there. But nevertheless, getting the management and so on involved, we curved that situation. So they are challenges, but what I would say to those challenges is not challenges that we have not overcome. We take them in a case-to-case situation, and we deal with them immediately, not allowing for it to spring off or to get any rooting anywhere.
In terms of the actual penalties for defaulting employers, what are some of these immediate penalties that the law allows you as the minister and your department to implement, to enforce onto an employer who have um, been defaulting in terms of, let us say, NIS, contributions not paid over to the scheme, um, not paying the requisite wages and salaries for the employees. What are some of the immediate um, actions that will be taken or are taken
Well, I
by your
like the point
ministry?
that you start out on NIS because it's something that we ought to make clear. The Ministry of Social Protection and the Minister Lawrence and Minister Jordan from Finance, we're looking to set up MOUs, and we're looking at collaboration between different ministries throughout the country under this government because NIS does not fall under the responsibility of the Department of Labor. So when one go to NIS and say that my NIS is being deducted, and they're saying to them it's not paid, and the NIS sends them to the Department of Labor. I want to know sometime if the person, in some cases, the NIS really understand what are their functions. There's no data here that we could open to look at NIS, but what we do is that when we go there now, we conduct these inspections, we're collaborating, and we're going to change some because that is the challenge area that we have, and we're working that out with the Ministry of Finance so that we will have a different system that we will announce later. But for example, now we come to your workplace, you have to provide a list of workers, the time they work, the pay sheet, and all of that. And when we look at that with the NIS, we will then submit that list to the NIS to verify if the NIS is being paid over, so that we can then say to the employer that you've been deducting this money. We had cases where money was being deducted from employees and was not paid over, and we had the employer pay them back the money that was being deducted. But this goes beyond. NIS has their act that can deal to the charges and the penalty, and for me these are criminal charges. That should be fraudulent conversion. You take the money out for the NIS and then you put it, and you have businesses getting wealthy because they see the deduction as NIS as a personal profit to their businesses. And that will not be tolerated. That is a sore area. That is an area that I think needs some urgent attention. And that is why we're looking we start to have these talks with the Minister of Finance. Fatalities, we know that a fatality on a workplace or anywhere should be reported immediately. Failure to do so, we charge them, they go to the court. However, they would pay a fine in the court. Some of these fines, you talked about the law, so we might jump into that because that would answer the question. It is just on Monday, we met at the Minister Basil Chambers. We sat down there with some of the staff because we're looking to amend some of the act when you come to IR and the OSH, which is Industrial Relation and the Occupational Safety and Health. So we are looking at that closely. That is a work in progress. We have already identified some parts. We have the attorney here with the consultant and others putting up a team, and then we're working with a staff that is assigned to us from the AG chambers to look at these, the act. So when we move to that amendment, definitely it will ease a lot of, because so far the court is not really a compensation court. So we're working there closely.
But in this regard, are we looking at stiffer penalties, stronger penalties?
Definitely, definitely, definitely. And we're looking to move from beyond penalties also, where the act would provide for compensation for the families or things like that. So why are we going to do that? Because we don't want fatalities. It shouldn't happen. So one shouldn't have to pay these stiff penalties. They have to avoid it.
Let us talk a little bit about your Labor Inspectorate Department. The staff going out doing inspections after having received complaints from employees. In terms of their capabilities, in terms of the powers that they have, to enforce the law in whatever area necessary. If it is not catered for now in legislation and as part of the department's functions and whatever, are we looking at giving them more powers to enforce the laws at that level? I know this is being done or plans by the government to do this in the mining sector. Minister Raffle Trotman has indicated that there are plans to give the mining officers more power in terms of enforcing legislation and the laws rather at that level, because they are almost the first responders to incidents and to ensure that the OSH committees um, and everything there at that level is operational. Are we looking at giving your inspectorate or your inspectors rather more powers to implementing or enforcing the law, since they are almost the first responders in these cases?
Well, in this instance, the Labor Occupation Safety and Health Act, the persons with the power first is the officers who go there to inspect. An inspector goes out there, in the act it is provided that he could go as far to cease work, to close a factory. And it is very clear he can then request of the employer, and not, I must not say request, he can then instruct the employer to find a certified engineer and to submit to this department a document after they would have corrected to show that the environment or the workplace is safe and proper for the worker. So the staff here, they have the authority by act. When we talk about their capability, they have capable staff. I think what we need here is more staffing. And the other thing that we are looking at, they had merged the IR with Occupational Safety and Health, the OSH. And that has really stifled both areas. So we're going to delink that so that occupational safety and health will have its own breath and life into it, and the staff will be focused on that area, and the staff that will be dealing with the IR, they will be dealing with IR industrial relations matters. So what are we talking about? We'll get more compliance. The staff will be able to operate now, not juggling the two together, but you have the staff that will be dealing with occupational safety and health, and then you have the staff. Of course, training is always on the table. And so in areas for training, we'll have some training, and everybody talk about training in some key area. You had mentioned earlier about labor trafficking and all of that. So all the officers conducting inspection and all of that, they will be trained to identify a suspected victim of labor trafficking, sexual exploitation, because the inspections is not only in industrial areas, but in hotels, in restaurants, in bars, and all over. And we are not only conducting inspection when there's a complaint. Inspection is on the table. Every staff have a quota of at least 8 inspections per week. So every day we have inspections conducted throughout the country, different areas. You have different officers going out to different regions and all of that. So okay, the inspection is something that will be ongoing all the time, and the process you talked about how it operates. You conduct the inspection, there are breaches, you leave a citation, and then what we do in some cases you might receive your letter apart from the citation pointing out the breaches. Some cases you might have a correction period. After that correction period, then the officer will revisit, and then if the officer go back and it's not corrected, you go to the court. We process you and go to the court. Some, if it is that alarming, then you'll have to go to the court forthwith.
There are 2 things I want to talk to you about at this point. You mentioned labor trafficking. Is this receiving as much attention from your end like the inspections and the efforts to ensure conformity with the laws? And secondly, if we are to talk about employers who, I asked you earlier about the powers of the labor inspectors, because in my opinion that I feel there are some employers who feel that this is just an inspection like normal, and I don't necessarily have to go through with all that they're saying, because when I go to the court, this is what will happen. I pay this and I'm out. That's why I asked you about increasing the penalties in terms of making it strict and all that. But coming back to labor trafficking, are we giving this enough or as much as emphasis as needed?
Well, labor trafficking and trafficking in general, I think all Guyana know that you have a minister within the ministry who was awarded as a tip heron.
Yes.
Those are my pocket babies, so to speak. Like I said before, I have a deep passion for the poor and vulnerable. But in the past year, labor trafficking training among the staff and all of that was not done, and that is why we are going to delink IR from occupation safety and health. That is why the officers will be properly trained to identify, to detect even one coming in here with a complaint, to have the knowledge in the interview and in the statement taken to identify if there are elements there of labor trafficking. So trafficking in person will be getting maximum like every other area. It is not on the plate, and because we are talking there about slavery, we have signed on to the freedom, the rights of workers, to those conventions. So those human rights violations, they're big violations. We will not condone them. It cannot be. But what we're doing right now, I'm just looking to how we're going to scheme out. We're going to even look at the whole structure of the staff and the kind of staff that's supposed to be there, the kind of training. So how we will address the whole idea with trafficking, it will be something new. Definitely by the next reporting period in June next year, there are certain things cannot be projected in the report. This government, we cannot afford that.
I know you are doing in-house work on reviewing some aspects with regard to child labor, but if I can get a little bit out of you, in terms of child labor, what are we doing at the moment in terms specifically awareness and identification of child labor? Coming to the labor inspectorate department for them to identify these so that we can address them.
Well, very soon we'll be putting out a press release on child labor. You know, there was a report out just recently. And so government, we are going to pronounce on the way forward, what we're going to do, what is happening so far. So we'll deal with that separately in a more holistic fashion.
Finally, on this issue with labor inspections and the impact and the successes, you mentioned over $40 million was received. This is success. This is good news for
the workers.
For the workers. Are we looking at more monies coming in so that they can be paid
Well,
properly?
workers generally, and even we have some of the larger companies making payments on a weekly basis. They would send a check. Some is in default. Some of them you could be commended, but we have companies coming in, and persons could expect. And like I said, what we're looking to achieve here is that the payments should be made to them out there, not even have them come in here. And that's why we got hold to enforcement of the act. So the workers will be paid. They got to come to the Department of Labor.
And before we go, this is something that will continue, even if it means all year round that it will continue.
It will continue. This is a must. Like you said, this is Simona Broomes. And this is what has happened, so this is just it.
Thank you, Minister.
Yes,
like I said, it's always a pleasure to sit with you.